Robert Hayden's poem "Those Winter Sundays" is about a son remembering his father. It is clear that there was distance between them and little communication, but love actually was present. It was just communicated subtly in the father's effort. The poem seems lament of the fact that the son who at the time could not perceive such subtle expressions of love and never returned them. The poem is 14 lines long, though these are broken up into three stanzas of 5, 4, and 5 lines respectively. Many of the lines are also Many of the lines are also written with exactly 10 syllables, and while they are not in iambic pentameter, they are of the same length as the lines of traditional sonnets. Let's see the summary of the poem. The poem begins with a very simple line that establishes the subject. The title has already suggested the quiet cold of winter Sundays, and this first line adds to it the notion of the early morning. The speaker's father is also introduced, which leads one to believe that he will figure centrally in the poem. The simple action of the man getting up and dressing is sharpened as an image by the use of the interesting and striking adjective blue-black, which describes a darkness that will soon be contrasted by the image of fire. This beginning might also be seen to suggest something of the father's will, as he is up before daybreak and is the one to confront the cold darkness of the home. The father's effort and suffering are then focused upon. His hands, a particularly human reference, are dry and pained from weekday work. Yet, this is not enough to keep him from making a fire. The element of self sacrifice is clear in this description, as the man disregards his own pain to warm and light the home for his family. The first stanza comes to a close with a quiet but surprising admission: no one ever thanked him. This addition seems to further the implied isolation of the father, as we learn that his suffering and effort go unacknowledged by the others. The last line also adds the element of lament or regret on the part of the speaker to the poem, as it shifts from the father to the son and anonymous others. In line 6, the focus shifts to the speaker's role in this Monday morning experience. Though it is described as the speaker hearing the cold splintering, breaking, the sounds continue to carry the connotation and sound of the fire started in the first stanza. The, the image of the fire affecting the cold also begins the progression from dark and cold to light and warm that seems to flow through the poem. In lines 7 and 8, once warmth is established, the father calls to the son, who then performs the same act as the father in line 2 by rising and dressing. This could be seen as parallel between the two to make a subtle connection that adds weight to the speaker's lament. It is possible the parallel suggests that the speaker has come to understand this childhood experience by eventually finding himself in the role of the father. The second stanza then ends as the first did, with an unexpected and powerful line. The idea of chronic angers is introduced into the calm scene in which the father makes the house warm and comfortable for his family. More specific information is not offered, however, and the reader is left to guess who the source of the anger is and what its causes might be. It is clear, though, that anger was a constant in the house, as much a part of the mornings as the fire itself. Hayden uses another hard C sound to express this, with the word chronic, which connects this idea of anger to the earlier description of the father's painful hands and the fire blazing. One could argue that this introduces complexity, psychological and structural, that makes the poem much more accurate, a description of such familial interaction. The third and final stanza begins with an image of emotional distance. This seems a fairly natural extension of the previous line's mention of the presence of anger in the house. The next two lines, however, imply that as much as the indifference may have been self-protective, it was also ungrateful. There is no judgment made about what the indifference was justified or could have been helped. There is only the admission that, in addition to possibly being the source of chronic angers, the father also tended to his child. The images offered are clear and strong, as first we are reminded of the building of the fire which drives out the cold, and then are given the more austere and sharper image of the man polishing shoes. Both of these images carry the connotations of the actions of a servant more than a father. In lines 13 and 14, after establishing the complex emotional sense of the removal, the speaker poses a striking rhetorical question that will end the poem. Line 13 provides, with an almost pleading repetition, the admission of ignorance on the part of the speaker. Then line 14 reveals what it is that the speaker was ignorant about, what he has discovered looking back on things. It is the nature of love, more specifically the love of the Father. The first key adjective to offer insight into this is austere. This means simple or unadorned, but also removed from the ideas of pleasure. All of this we see in the description of the father who neglects his own comfort and confronts the cold and pain of his hands in order to foster the comfort of his family. The second adjective, lonely, then adds to this the element of isolation, which the father experienced each morning as he built the fire. All of this seems to point to the fact that when the speaker love, as a child he assumed love was expressed in certain more obvious ways. It is not until the speaker has grown significantly older that he realizes that love is often expressed silently and indirectly, and he is then able to recognize it in the early morning gestures of his father. Though there is still a sadness at the end of the poem, a lament for the opportunity to thank the father or treat him better, there is also a feeling of resolution. It is as if homage is being paid finally in the making of the poem. It is evident that the speaker of this poem is telling his story from in trying to describe what it was like at his house on those mornings. He comes up with details that do not necessarily give the reader a vivid picture of the way things were. The details we are given are more impressionistic, giving us a sense of the young observer through the impressions he received. From the details here we can tell that the father worked hard as a laborer outdoors in the cold, that the house was heated by a furnace that would burn out every night, that the house was filled with unspecific chronic angers, and that the son owned more than one pair of shoes, and he wore the good pair on Sunday. From these few facts, the reader has to fill in the life that has either slipped from the speaker's mind, been suppressed, or has purposely been left incomplete to make the reader think. Despite the good shoes, this is obviously a poor family. The father and the temperature in the house was allowed to drop so low in the night that reheating it made the woodwork splinter and break. For such a poor household to have special shoes for Sunday implies deep religious conviction, and yet there are those chronic angers. Who else lived there? Does no one ever thank him? Refer to the child's mother, siblings, or extended family. These details are left out of this memory. What did I know? The speaker repeats in the 13th line. Now, an intellectual, he uses the words austere and offices when simpler, more direct words would be sufficient. From this perspective, only the harshest details surface to memory. The speaker of the poem tells us about love, but there is no mention of that love in the details that he remembers. Precisely because of the slim clues of his father's love or shadows among things he remembers. The poem tells us that we tend to the bad things in life so clearly that it gives a distorted impression, but that we can find love when we examine our strongest memories.